This station is going to focus on transitions. We've talked about transitions as important components of our writing, and every time you've done a writing assignment this year, I have required and graded you on your use of transitions. Well, what are they? They're words, phrases, and clauses that connect ideas together and create fluency in writing. We put them at beginnings of sentences, and they help tie your ideas together to make it clear to your reader. So, how do we find them? First, we're going to look at the beginning of the sentence. And I say how do we find them, but it's also how do we use them, how do we write with them. So we can either, if we're reading something, we look at the beginnings of sentences, or if we notice we don't have any, we need to put them at the beginning of our sentences. When we find a transition, we need to make sure there's a comma at the end of the transition. And so what kinds of transitions are we talking about here? Well, you could have a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrases can come anywhere in a sentence, but if we put it at the beginning of the sentence, it's showing how something's connected to another idea, when or where something's located. If it's at the beginning of a sentence, then the prepositional phrase has to have a comma after it. And you almost hear that natural pause when you read it. Another type of transition is an infinitive, to plus a verb. Again, infinitives can come anywhere in a sentence, but when we put them at the beginning of a sentence, it needs a comma after it. And a lot of times you're going to have to listen to where that pause is. To run to the store, comma, I needed to first get gas in the car. So sometimes that infinitive phrase has some words that finish the thought. You've got to really read that and think about where the thought break is to decide where your comma goes. Next, you've got adverbs. Adverbs are the ones we're really trying to move you away from this year as 7th graders. Words like first, then, next, finally. We really want to try to get you more into phrases and clauses. But adverbs at the beginning of the sentence, some of them ending in ly, often need commas after them. And then the newest type of transition we've talked about are dependent clauses. Again, dependent clauses can come anywhere in a sentence, but when we put them at the beginning of a sentence, there's a pause, and you've got to find where that clause ends and put the comma. Dependent clauses are those clauses that start with an abubis and have a subject and a verb after them. So when you did your quiz on transitions at the beginning of the week, you were asked to highlight the transitions in this paragraph. Thinking back to what we just talked about, we're looking at the beginnings of sentences, and we're going to use the commas to help us find them. Over the long weekend, Mrs. Culleton decided to go snowboarding. I hear the pause, and I see the comma. So over the long weekend is my first transition. Over is a preposition. Weekend is a noun. So I've got a prepositional phrase at the beginning of a sentence. Transitions don't have to be there. I could take it out. I could just say Mrs. Culleton decided to go snowboarding. That is a complete sentence all by itself. But because I put that transition at the beginning, it gives a little bit more information. To ensure she did not embarrass herself in front of her students at Alpine Valley, she drove 3 hours to Mad River Mountain in Zanesfield, Ohio. I see that beginning to ensure, that's an infinitive. And just like we were just talking about, to ensure, I don't hear the pause here. To ensure what? To ensure she did not embarrass herself in front of her students at Alpine Valley, there's my pause, and my clue there is that there's a comma. So we've got an infinitive with some thoughts to finish it off. Thankfully, the temperature was mild and the slopes were filled with fresh powder. Looking at the beginning of my sentence, I see thankfully, one of those words that end in ly, must be an adverb, and I see a comma at the end of it. It was the perfect day for her to learn rails. It is my first word in this sentence. I don't see a comma, and I don't see any kind of phrasing. It is actually the subject of the sentence. The subject of your sentence is not going to be a transition. So this sentence has no transition. On her first run, she fell and hit her head on an icy patch. On is a preposition. I look to see there's a comma on her first run. Pause. There's my transition. It tells when she fell and hit her head on an icy patch on her first run. If she hadn't been wearing a helmet, she would have cracked her skull open. To the beginning, I see a comma here. If If she hadn't been wearing a helmet, pause, she would have cracked her skull open. This is a dependent clause. If is one of our abubases, and it has a subject after it, she, and a verb phrase. She had been wearing, hadn't been wearing. I could take that transition out, and I have a complete sentence left. She would have cracked her skull open. But the transition gives a little bit more information and adds detail to the sentence. After a long break, she tried again with her son. After, I go to my comma, after a long break. I do hear that pause. That's why the comma's there. After a long break, she tried again with her son. So here's a prepositional phrase. In the end, she decided, she had decided to stick to green slopes. I look at the beginning of my sentence, in the end. There's my prepositional phrase that's used as a transition. So, if you didn't have this on your paper, I want you to get a highlighter and you're correcting your test right now. And then you're going to take a copy of this handout and you're going to do the exact same thing. Keep this if you need to go back and watch the presentation again. Use your notes, use your test, use whatever you need to. But I would expect that after watching this, and being allowed to use any resource that you have at your desk, you should be able to find all the transitions.